Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the AI Healthcare Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Reed, and today we are joined with my friend, Michael Walker, who is the CMO of SmythOS. Thank you so much for your time today, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. I appreciate you having me.
Of course, we're glad you're here. And how did you get into the AI field?
Yeah, it's been a long journey. So I really started dabbling, I would say, back in around 2014. I worked for a company in the machine learning space, and that's sort of I guess, a predecessor of sorts to AI. From there, I really was in the marketing automation, MarTech space for a long time. So I was always around like the newest technology and newest tools. And then about 3 years ago, I started working as a fractional CMO for several different generative AI companies. And then fast forward to now, I've pretty much done only that. I founded and ran an agency called the AI Agency for about 3 years before joining SmythOS. So it's really just been kind of an ingrained part of my journey.
And how has AI technology or the field just changed in general since when you first entered it to now?
Oh man, it changes every day almost. It's one of the fastest moving markets I've ever seen. I would say one of the main things is just the pace of adoption. So I don't know if you've ever seen like the graphics of companies to reach 100 million users, right? And you'll see like before TikTok were these really long timelines, and then TikTok was like the first one to do it in under a year, and then ChatGPT did it in about 30 to 60 days. So just people are adopting it in mass. They're really incorporating it into their day to day, and you don't usually see technology adoption that fast. So I think that's one of the ways is that it's becoming more user friendly every single day while the technology advances, which is pretty unique.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember when Facebook came out, and not to age myself, I mean, but it was in eighth grade. So that was 10 plus years ago. And it's amazing to me, like how much, you know, social media has successfully integrated itself with AI technology. Because people weren't even talking about ChatGPT or AI 10 to
Right.
15 years ago.
No, it hasn't. And even with AI, you can use it for day to day everything from I've used AI to help me generate new workout plans, right? Or like diets and meal planning. Like it's an insane leap in technology.
Yeah. And that goes into my next question nicely. So, what is the story behind SmythOS?
Yeah, the abbreviated version is we previously had a generative AI product. It was a kind of pre-ChatGPT version of ChatGPT, but it was made exclusively for SEO. So you could write SEO blog content, and it would optimize it for you based on keyword, and it of course would write all the article and outline and everything. But then not long after that, when ChatGPT was released, we knew that generative AI was only going to grow and scale. And there wasn't one place where you could use all these different models. So you could use ChatGPT alongside Claude, right? Or alongside Gemini or whatever your model was. But further, you weren't able to take the power of ChatGPT, for example, and
Mhm.
connect that with like tools you're already using, like your email or content generation platform or whatever. That was sort of the catalyst to building Smith. Inside of SmythOS, you can use any large language model with nearly any web application or API and just insert that AI power into all the cool things that you're already doing. So that was kind of the origin story, if you
Yeah.
will.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of, do you remember like pre-iPhone,
Mhm.
anywhere you went or on on a trip, for example, you had your iPhone, you had your actual cell phone, you had like your
Right.
calculator. It's kind of, it seems like Smith is, it's kind of adopting that same behavior where it's just combining everything into one entity.
That's exactly it. Hey, I remember listening to music before I had my first MP3 player, right? I was a Walkman kind of guy with CDs and headphones. And yeah, I mean, then you had, just like you said, your iPod and a phone, and now it's all into one. So exactly, very similar sort of progression.
And it's specific, on that note, it's just amazing how just even with the integration of technology, we look at it as one term nowadays. So just even the language when technology integrates changes too as well. And just from that, like just how human behavior and what's being discussed also changes rapidly too as well.
Yeah, I was going to say habits, human behavior, habits, same sort of thing. But the way that we go about our day-to-day lives changes as technology does, right? We can make more informed choices for better or for worse. It's wild. It really is.
And on that note, so SmythOS, so it aims to not only empower but also integrate AIs, APIs, which stand for application program interfaces, and data sources with its no-code platform. And from a marketing perspective, where did you see the most opportunity with what was currently on the market for no-code platforms?
Yeah, there really wasn't anything in terms of AI integration on the market. There were open source tools that you could use, but there wasn't a no code or low code solution that also had the power of integrating like really advanced AI technology with existing technology infrastructure, right? So there wasn't anything where you could come and just with a couple clicks connect ChatGPT to your CRM, for example. And the only way to do that at the time was through like robust development using like an open source model or developing your own kind of solution. And we saw that and said, hey, there are going to be millions and millions of people who want to use this for their business, either large businesses who aren't ready from a technical perspective, or individuals, right? Entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, small businesses who can't afford to develop all their technology in house, right? But they're going to want to leverage this. And so that's what drove us to build SmythOS, is we knew that not only were there going to be the chat GPTs of the world, but other really cool, like vertical specific AI solutions that could really help particular companies, but there was no way to connect those things together. It would either cost you a ton of money or a ton of time, and so we tried to solve that dilemma.
Great. And did you have any uh, growing up, like pre-Smith OS, any personal experiences with kind of with combining AIs, APIs, and data sources?
Uh, but before SmythOS, so before that, as I mentioned, I ran an agency called the
Yeah.
AI Agency. So we did, and again, my going back to like 2013, 2014, I worked at companies who we solely used AI and machine learning for retention efforts, for example, for like really large companies. So I had been around that for sure, but not to any level like with SmythOS, because again, it's uh, just the knowledge gap between like your very senior AI developers and then your average person for a long time has just been too wide, right? Like there hasn't been enough unless you were a researcher or academic or a really high level developer. No one was really doing that sort of stuff. So I think for a lot of people, it's pretty new within the last year and a half to probably 2 years.
hmm Yeah, because I mean, and just basic, just how people understand AI. It's, we're still in kind of that baby stage. It seems kind of like
Exactly.
what the internet was in the 90s. It seems like that's kind of, we're in that same process right now.
100%. It's still it's not quite as much the Wild West as the internet was in those days, but it's close, right? Like you'll see companies have to update their models all the time because they're learning and building guardrails around it and all that sort of stuff. So it's yeah, it's definitely in its infancy. The difference though is the rate of progression is so much faster, right? Like moving from here to here used to take, let's say, a year in just the beginning of internet days. That same timeline is like a week now. I mean, it just moves so quick.
Hmm. And what from just out of curiosity, like what causes that quickness?
Well, the probably the most obvious answer is right now there's a ton of money in AI, right? You're talking billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars into research and investment. So when large corporations and even like governments across the world, when they decide to invest in something, first comes the money and then comes all the research and the people trying to solve problems. So that's number one. But second is just the nature of artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? The idea is that it learns every time there's an input. And when you have input on massive scales, like with ChatGPT, you have, hundreds of million, if not billions of users every single month. The tool can take in that data and learn from it and then kind of improve upon itself. Like we've never really seen a technology that could literally improve itself just based on how a user would utilize it. So I think those two things are really the culmination of the speed. One's the money and two is just the nature of the technology itself.
And when it comes to training data too as well, it's been discussed, making sure that the data is clean, making sure it's correct, number one, too as well. And so where do you see, just with the rapid innovation, like, do you kind of see the potential for quote unquote bad data to stop that? Or like, do you think it could be like, how badly do you think it can veer off AI can be veered off course from an innovation perspective?
Yeah, I think I would say the powers that be for these things, particularly like let's take OpenAI for example.
Mm-hmm.
They have Microsoft kind of as their own overlords, but they have a board, right? They have really really smart people who look at what data do we use and not use in our training models, for example, and how do we utilize that data. So in any kind of closed source environment like that, I think it's probably okay. The issue will become once you have these widespread open source models that are being used.
Mm-hmm.
It even comes down to not only like, let's say, can it make right or wrong inferences based on data, but even things like ethical and moral considerations, right? Like if you have a massive open source model and you're training it from let's say scratch, and you get the vast majority of people who teach it that a generally immoral action is indeed moral, well that's the information that the model has to go on, right? So something that we've seen is immoral for all of humanity, now this AI's baseline is, oh, this is actually a moral action. So I think it's less about how can the data interfere, and it's more about what are the safeguards that we put around it. Like, do we have accountability? Do we have like forums and maybe even governing bodies or whatever it might be that just make sure that when we're training and deploying and utilizing this technology, that it's done in a safe and responsible manner. So it's more about us and how we kind of guide it than it is just the data that we give it.
And do you foresee that we as humans are going to have to shift our behaviors at all when it comes to the integration of AI into our daily lives?
Oh, I think a lot of people already are, right? Even if you look at search trends and how people search, right? A lot of times, if you have a question or want to understand something, a lot of people will go to something like ChatGPT and just ask it, right? And now imagine that in an embodiment like a tutor or inside of robotics or inside of smart devices inside of your home. So I think it absolutely will, and I think it probably already has. I think the question for us is how far do we let it kind of infiltrate our day-to-day lives? Like, is it strictly enough to be used for business purposes, or do we really want to kind of invite AI to the dinner table?
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. I mean, prime example of how I use AI in my day-to-day life is, so, like the Starbucks app, and you can like order drinks through Starbucks, and then, it tells the barista, oh, like, Dylan wants X, Y, and Z, know this, add this. I mean, it's just kind of what you just said. It's amazing. You take a step back and you're like, oh, wow, I'm already using this technology anyway. Like, you don't really think about it.
Oh, I mean, even if you're anyone that, and I imagine anyone listening to this would be, if you're someone that uses the internet or your device pretty often,
Mm.
um, I would suggest everybody go to ads.google.com, and it'll show you your own advertising profile. That's all AI and machine learning, right? And I think people would be shocked at how accurate it is. Like, what are your interests? What kind of stuff do you spend your time looking at? What are you more likely to buy? Your propensity for spending and disposable income. Where would it go? Like, is it entertainment? Is it food? I mean, that stuff has companies have been using that towards us, the consumers, for a really long time. Probably more than most people even know.
Mhm. No, that's so it's ads.google.com.
Yeah, I believe it might be adsettings.google.com, but you type that up, just hit enter, and it'll show you your own personal advert. I think it is adsettings.google.com, and you'll see your own advertising profile. And it's scary just how accurate it actually is.
Wow. And you bring up another interesting point, with like, oh well, we need to we need to rein in big tech. We need to, do this, we need to do that. I was actually reading something recently in like Tech Policy Press, and they found out that when it comes, it's basically the study was in regards to ads and kind of Google, and that there's really no difference between, you know, how I understand it is, ad spending in in relation to how much time people spend on Google is how I
Mhm.
understand it. I'm not like in the market, I'm not in the agency area, but anymore. But that's how I really am. But yeah, it's just to kind of mimic what you said. People aren't, I guess another way to say it, people aren't bothered by ads as much as we think they are.
No, no, no. I mean, in fact, the research shows the opposite. We quite enjoy them. It makes life very convenient, right? If technology can understand the problems that we're facing, and provide a well-fitting, reasonable solution at a price point that they know we can afford, most people would welcome that. If you're suffering from the same sort of problem over and over, and a solution to that problem exists out there somewhere, I think most people would probably want to know about that solution, and so yeah, I'm with you. I think most people may like to complain about it quite a bit. Oh, these ads, but it makes life a lot easier. It really does.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, another thing I like to argue back is like, well, Google and Facebook and X and, they're not tying you down to a chair and are saying to you, use our services or else. That's
Right.
what I think. I think in this country, there is a misunderstanding between, what is free speech and what is not free, not to get into the issue too much, but it's like, that's a private enterprise. Like, there are privileges associated with it. That is not a publicly owned entity. And for some reason, people tend to, you know, get those two confused.
Yeah, I always look at it like this. We all do what we do for a living,
Mhm.
and we charge a fee, whether that's a salary, or if you're a consultant, maybe it's a consulting fee or an hourly rate, whatever it is. Um, that's it. I mean, that's just the way that it sort of goes. And I bet most people would be shocked to learn that Facebook and Google probably know more about them than their closest friends or partners even. I mean, that's just how finely tuned and how well trained that these models that these large tech companies use. So just maybe think about that as you're browsing and utilizing these platforms.
Hmm. And which brings in my next question about the SmythOS organization. Like, how has the response been from clients and, as well as potential clients?
Yeah, overwhelmingly positive. I mean, we have I'd say in one sentence, what we allow companies to do is develop these like insanely high powered AI solutions in a fraction of the time and at a fraction of the cost that they could before. That's a win for everybody. Like, you can go from idea to implementation 90% faster. It costs you literally pennies on the dollar that it would have before. And generally, we can help somebody build in weeks what would take them months or even years to do entirely on their own. So we don't have many, complaints or negative feedback. Like it's a very positive response thus far.
Awesome. And from a marketing perspective, how do you see, since this is the AI healthcare podcast, how do you see SmythOS being a player in the greater AI healthcare field?
Yeah, great question. Healthcare is one of those, healthcare, banking. I'm sure there's others, but like those two in particular, data security is so important, right? I mean, there's legislation around like the lengths you have to go to protect patient information, and the last thing most companies want to do, healthcare and banking in particular, is to pass that data through like an unknown cloud source, right? Where you don't know who has access to this and who can hack into it. Um, what we've built at Smith is what's called a local runtime environment, so that healthcare companies, for example, can still come to a company like Smith and they can build their agents in our cloud-based agent studio, but then they can deploy them locally, right? Either onto their own servers or in any premises in which they've set up to in a secure environment, so they can still utilize the speed and agility to build AI workflows, but they keep all the security and compliance that they've built with their own internal environments. And so that's one main way, right? Is I think like as a healthcare company, you couldn't go and give like patient data and information to ChatGPT, right? You'd be breaking probably a bunch of laws, and at worst and at best, it would be a very unethical and questionable practice. We understood that. We kind of saw that coming from early on. And again, those two verticals in particular, healthcare and financial verticals. And that's why we built the runtime environment, so that you can still create these workflows and these AI agents as quickly and satisfactory as possible, and still deploy securely in your own environment.
Yeah. You bring up a great point about banking. And from what I remember when I was younger, the finance industry was actually the first sector that embraced all of these technological changes.
Mm. Yeah, and they still do. The difficulty that the financial space normally finds is they're one of the most targeted industries in the world, right?
Mm.
Like trying to, you don't have to go in and rob a bank any longer. If you want to, pull off a heist, it's most likely going to be done virtually, right? It's going to be it's going to be a hack of some sort. So they have to build everything basically custom and on premises, and that takes so much time and so much money. So banking has always had like, I think healthcare faces a lot of the same issues in terms of like privacy and data security, but I don't think there's as much of like a external cybersecurity threat to healthcare quite like there is in banking. So it's like a whole additional element that the industry has to fend with, that the rest of us don't, for the most part. That's not to say no one faces the threat, but not to the same degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and that actually goes into my last question nicely. So what do you think key stakeholders, so specifically elected officials, need to understand about AI, specifically kind of across multiple industries like healthcare, for example, when constructing policy?
Yeah, great question. Number one is you can't stop it, right? I think one of the biggest mistakes that we could make from a societal perspective is to become afraid, fear of the unknown, and try to legislate our way out of it, right? And say like, okay, this is banned here, this is banned for this reason. Like take a healthcare company, for example. Even if at an organizational level you
Mm-hmm.
have banned AI tools or products, you're still a company made up of individuals, and those individuals, in order to do their job more productively, are going to be using AI, whether it's company sanctioned or not. Like it's just going to happen. at a large scale with large organizations. So I think if we understand that it's here now, right? It's not coming, it's here. Then what we want to keep in mind is we need to build some sort of oversight regulatory bodies, whether it's government sanctioned or whether it's private, I don't know, but it's really important that we have some of our best and brightest minds to be like the oversight committee to say, here are the ethical considerations, here's the moral ramifications around it. And, I think that's number one. And then number two, um, the government needs to really just keep in mind just how powerful this stuff is. It's not just a productivity tool. Like if in the wrong hands,
Hmm.
uh, it can be used to influence on a wide level. It can be used to spread false information. It can be used to social engineer large scale like hacking situations. So I think we just need to really be mindful that it's already here and it's not going anywhere. And it's incredibly powerful, especially if we let it fall into the wrong hands. So it's better to have guardrails early than too late.
Hmm. And you bring up an interesting point. Because I would go as far as arguing that elected officials have already lost the battle when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way around it. I would even, I mean, if you go back to 2016, there's a lot of conversation around, Russian interference in the election. That if it happened or how it happened would have been done through AI, right? Through sentiment analysis and large scale, like bot farms where they can just push out ideas and in mass to the tunes of millions in a very short period of time. I wouldn't be surprised if most campaigns or political groups or entities are already using it, right? Whether they admit it publicly or not. It's too powerful to be ignored. I have to imagine that, especially after the situation in 2016, that they're probably on top of it. Whether
Yeah.
they admit it or not, I think they're probably on top of it.
Yeah. Well, and just from what's happened here in the United States, a lot of the states have actually been the ones who've carried the mantle when it comes to enacting AI policy, kind of in their respective jurisdictions. But a lot of the legislation has been around like deep fakes and
Mm.
fake voices. So it's nothing, you know, I don't want to say ooh and ah, but it's very basic stuff.
Yeah, I think that's part of. Look, the bureaucracy moves very slow, right? It's a very very slow paced kind of machine, and AI is the exact opposite. I mean, it
Mm,
just moves so fast that I think it'll be difficult for large regulatory bodies, be it state or government, like I said before, to legislate away anything. I think oversight committees, right, that are comprised of private and public sector individuals and stakeholders
mm,
that have some sort of oversight. Think of, I mean, we do this with in the financial space with
mhm.
the FTC and the SEC. Like we have similar roadmaps for this. I think that's what we need. If the states try to take it upon themselves to legislate this stuff, they're always going to be 10 steps behind because that's the nature of the game, right? It takes so long to get legislation passed that by the time you pass that legislation, AI has moved 10 steps ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's the last time I checked, it's a good 10 to 15 years to get a bill passed in the United States, and that's assuming like everything goes well. And this too as well, but it's can you I can't fathom how much AI changes within 10 to 15 years.
I was just about to say we could come back in 10 years and I'll probably have a living, breathing avatar, and you'll have one who will have this conversation on behalf of us while we're out on the beach or doing whatever it is you want to do. And then we'll see can government keep up while they're legislating
Yeah,
AI as it exists today. I mean, it's
yeah,
just it's just not possible.
yeah. Which on on that note, I was going to say great movies that James Cameron made.
100%, without
Yeah,
question,
yeah. I
without
think
question. There's actually another movie. It's a bit off topic, but the Joaquin Phoenix movie called Her,
Hmm.
Her. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's about like interacting with an operating system. That's the premise of the movie. A guy, you know, interacts with an operating system and falls in love, and it's this story. And it was like a sci-fi futuristic kind of film. And we're kind of here today, right? With ChatGPT introduction of their voice models, you can chat with it, speak to it, have a conversation. It's a little scary sometimes how close we are to what just a few years ago would have been considered like science fiction.
Yeah, and it's interesting, kind of in my daily life, I actually prefer to go to like Perplexity AI to search for things than I do for Google because it's just so
Yeah.
much faster.
Right. And it's the inferences that AI can make, right? It can understand not only what your like search terms are, for example, but like the intent behind your search. And then it can kind of reason. It's almost like having somebody who's your full-time, let's say, search assistant, where you say like, "Hey, Michael, I want to know the answer to this question. Go search it for me and come back and tell me the answer." That's the power that Perplexity has. And yeah, that's one great example, right? It's like I think earlier you kind of asked about adoption. Like this is how people will start adopting it at a small scale, and then before you know it, AI is like a native thing to each one of us individually. And then when it becomes native to individuals, now it's easy to make it native to society. And then AI is in your voting mechanisms and your entire societal makeup and your healthcare systems. And yeah, I mean it's a slow but yet very quick progression.
And how long would you say uh, it would that full adoption be?
I don't know if there's even really an end goal. I think it's a moving goalpost, right? I think it's like I don't know if you would have asked in the early 90s when will everybody use the internet? It's like, well, what does use it mean, right? What does adopt mean in this context? Because if that's using Perplexity or ChatGPT, I'd say probably in the next couple of years. But by that point, you won't even probably know of some of these names because what will exist then? Right? Like how many people remember, MySpace or still use MySpace? Like we've moved on to Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, right? Multiple versions of this one thing called social media. I think it's a similar path, as we're starting here today. But by the time we're all using it, it has now evolved, right? And there's a new it. There will be subsections of AI. There'll be like AI for the home and AI for the workplace and AI for your automobile and just all these different things.
Yeah, which that brought me to another movie. Do you remember the Disney movie? I think it was 1997 called Smart House. I don't know.
I don't, smart house. I
So
don't.
the movie is about basically this family that wins a house, and it's like totally like AI. It's like, oh well, Pat is the name of the operating system. They're like, Pat, make me this, or Pat, make sure this gets done, or Pat, do that. And that was 30 years ago, and like people thought that was like never going to happen, like that's something
Right.
from like outer space. And it's kind of what you were just alluding to. It's like, oh wow, like this is actually happening.
Right? Like we're in the middle of it. I mean, even think it's been a while since Siri and Alexa, and now you can ask it to maybe play a particular song or
Hmm.
what's the weather or search this. But pretty soon, when Siri and Alexa are tied to your washing machine, and you can ask it to wash your clothes, or your dishwasher, and you can ask it to wash your dishes, or your vacuum and ask it to vacuum, it's exactly that. Yeah.
Hmm. Awesome. And Michael, where can people find out more about you as well as SmythOS?
Yeah, our website is smythos.com. It's smythos.com. I would say anyone interested, go there. We have an academy that's completely free. So if you're new to AI, whether you're an individual or a business, we have an intro course that just talks about what is AI, what are large language models, what are AI agents to just kind of help get you up to speed a little bit. And then we have different levels of completely free certification so that anyone can become an AI engineer and start building useful things for their business. So academy.smythos.com is a really great place to start.
Awesome. And be sure to subscribe to the AI Healthcare Podcast YouTube channel, as well as listen to the audio version of this podcast interview on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much again for your time today, Michael.
Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate you having me.
Have a great